Hey everybody, welcome back to Tech Talk Education. This is Dr. Heldman. How are you doing? It's midsummer. Some of you are getting ready to go back to school, wherever that might be. Good luck to you. And in this movie, what I want to do is begin talking about virtualization. It's going to be super important to you, especially if you want to work with cloud providers. They all use virtualization. That's the heart and soul of the cloud. Now, the good news about it is we can learn about virtualization right on our own computers without having to get involved with the cloud right away. And so learning this knowledge about virtualization is going to be helpful to you later on. It's also going to help you when you're experimenting around, learning cybersecurity and things like that. So this should be a lot of fun. Let's get started. I want to begin to this movie by just introducing you to a couple of terms. So we're talking about virtualization here. The idea is that you have an operating system that your computer is running, whether you're using a Mac or you're using Windows or maybe you're even using Linux on your computer. These are called operating systems, and what they're used for is to control the computer. So they are where you install all the software. You go out to the web using your operating system. Your operating system has a browser installed on it or more than one browser, type of browser. The idea here is that an operating system intervenes with the hardware and the software to allow you to do the work that you're doing. And there's basically three personal versions: Macintosh, Windows, and Linux. Now, what we want to do is we say to ourselves, well, gosh, I'm running Windows. Maybe what I want to do is I want to try working with, say, Linux, for example. I want to learn more about Linux. And so how can I do that? I need to go out and buy another laptop and install Linux on it and play around with that way. Well, you could, but you could also resort to a virtualization, and you could use software to do that. And what software allows you to do is install an operating system on your computer. Now, it's not really running your computer, but it's installed in such a way that you can look at it and use it as though it is an operating system installed on your computer. It'll work exactly the same way as it does if you were to install it on, say, a laptop. And it allows you to experiment with it, play around with it, learn more about it. So it's really, really cool. Now, you should know that there's two different types of virtualization software packages. Let me advance this slide here. These are called hypervisors. So when we have software that is performing virtualization duties for us, it's called a hypervisor. And there are two different kinds. There's a thing called a type 1 hypervisor, which is the big stuff. Like, this is what gets installed at Amazon Web Services or at Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud Platform or others. So they're using a type 1 hypervisor. And the deal here is that I buy a big server, an expensive server. I install the type 1 hypervisor software on it first. I don't install an operating system at all. The type 1 hypervisor software is acting as the base operating system for the server, and then once I'm done with that, I can install all of these different operating systems right on top of the type 1 hypervisor. The big guy in town is called VMware. It's a very big company. It was recently purchased by Broadcom, and there are some others, like Microsoft has a thing called Hyper-V that they use. And of course, Amazon uses a different hypervisor software for AWS and so forth, Google as well. So a type 1 hypervisor, think of it as big software. It's in the cloud. It doesn't need its own operating system, so we don't have to install an operating system at all on the server. All we do is install the type 1 hypervisor software, and then after that we can install any operating system that we want. That's not what we're doing here. What we're doing here is what's called a type 2 hypervisor, and that is something that's local to our computer. It's software that we can download and begin to use right on our local computer, whether it's Mac, Linux, or Windows. And it too allows us to install an operating system. The big difference is that when we install Hypervisor 2 software, it's installing on our operating system. So if we're using Windows, it's going to install in Windows and run on Windows. If we're on the Mac, it's going to install on the Macintosh computer and run on Mac and so forth. So that's the difference in the two, and you need to get used to the terms type 1 hypervisor and type 2 hypervisor. Now I want to introduce you to my two favorites. I'm not going to show you how to use Microsoft Hyper-V. That's fine, you can mess around with it if you want. What I really like, I'm a big fan of, and I got to tell you, I'm not a big fan of a lot of Oracle software, but Oracle, which is a very large corporation, has developed a Type 2 hypervisor called VirtualBox. You can see it here on the screen, and I really like this software. This is very, very good. So this is the one that I'm going to use. I do want you to know that you can use Microsoft Hyper-V. It's built right into Windows, so you can turn it on and begin to use it. And of course, it's used in Microsoft Azure, which is their cloud platform environment. And also, I want to introduce you to VMware. Now, you should be aware that VMware was recently purchased by a big networking company called Broadcom. And so they've changed their licensing a little bit. But the main thing I want to have you know about is that there's two versions of Type 2 hypervisor from VMware. Anyway, we are looking at Workstation Player here, and it's on version 17, and you can download that and you can run it for free. You do not have to pay for that. If you wanted to use it commercially, you'd have to buy a license for it and pay for it that way. But in this case, what I'm going to teach you to do and what I'm going to use is VirtualBox. So here's what you do. So you click the Downloads button here. And if you're on the Windows machine, you go to Windows Hosts. Now, what does that word hosts mean? So this is a very funny term. If we're working in computers and we're in IT, we call a device that has an IP address that's running an operating system a host. And so this term is really common to computers, but it's not something that you and I run around using normally if we're not talking to IT people. So you should get used to this word hosts. Now you can see that VirtualBox will run on Windows, it will run on Mac, it will run on Linux, it will run on Oracle software. They purchased a company that have manufactured an operating system called Solaris. They purchased a company called Sun Microsystems quite a while ago now. And when they purchased that, they got several things with it. One of the things that they got was the Solaris OS, which is very, very good. They also got all of the hardware from Sun Microsystems, because these guys Sun Microsystems was very good. Their software was very good. Their products were good. And so by virtue of Oracle acquiring Sun Microsystems, you now can install VirtualBox on Solaris. In my case, I'm running Windows 11, so I'm going to click this guy here. And then you just go ahead and download it. And you can see that it's VirtualBox 7.0.2 win.exe. And you get an executable. And if you've installed any other kind of software, you just double click it to run it and install it, and that's all you need to do. There is one more thing I want you to know about, and that is that you want to install the Oracle VirtualBox extension pack as soon as you're done installing VirtualBox, and we're up to version 7 now. You should also download and install the VirtualBox extension pack, and this is what it looks like here. It's VBox TAC Extent EXT pack. So both of those should be installed. Now I've already got it installed, so I'm not going to go ahead and install it for you. I trust that you can get the software installed and working okay. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to pick up this movie where we're actually looking at VirtualBox, and we're going to begin to install some software. What are we going to install? Well, I think the best thing to install, I'm going to click for a new tab here, and I'm going to look for Ubuntu Linux. I want to show you after have installed Oracle VirtualBox, I'm going to do some movies on how to run Linux inside a virtualized environment. Why is that important? Well, first of all, you need to learn more about virtualization. That's a given. You must know about it. It's expanded over the last 15 years to be incredibly, incredibly important. But also, you have the ability now to run Linux inside a virtualized environment, and so that's very cool. So this is where you can begin to install Linux, play around with it, see how it works. So I'm going to go here to Ubuntu. Ubuntu is the big player in Linux. It's using a version of Linux called Debian Linux, but we'll talk about that more when we get into Linux. I'm going to click this link here, download, and I'm going to go ahead and download the OS. Now I want to download Ubuntu Desktop here, not Ubuntu Server. So I'll download Ubuntu Desktop. You can see that the latest and greatest version here is Ubuntu 24.04. The LTS stands for long-term support. It means that you can have this for 4 years. They'll support it for 4 years, so you don't have to worry about, oh, you know what, I'm going to run out of time here evaluating this thing. And you can see that there's an Ubuntu Pro, so if you did want to sign up for that, you could do that. Now, the cool thing about Linux is it's free and open source software. It's called FOSS, and it's open source, which means that you can get it for free, you can run it for free, you can learn it for free. So Ubuntu is a very, very good product. It's made by a company called Canonical. They've been in business quite a while now. This is a very mature product. It's not the only Debian product out there. There are some others that we need to learn, but right now we're just going to deal with Ubuntu 24.04. So I click the download button, and then it wants to know how I want to use this. Now, I don't really want to sign up for a newsletter. I don't need to fill out this stuff here. What I'm going to do is download it to downloads, and I want you to note here where my mouse cursor is pointing, this is an ISO file. ISO stands for International Standards Organization. This is a standardized installation file that we use when we're installing certain software products, and Ubuntu is an ISO file. So what that means is that we have to go through the full installation process, which is fine. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put it in my D drive. I've got a software folder here. Here it is right here. I've got a Linux folder. I've got an Ubuntu folder right here. And you can see that I've got version 22 now. Now what I'm going to get is version 24, and we're going to put that in a virtualized environment. So I'll save that. That's going to take a minute to download. I'm going to pause the movie, and I'll pick you up when we're ready to install this inside Oracle VirtualBox. Okay, well now that is a pretty big download, isn't it? Mine took 7 minutes here at my house, or 10 minutes, something like that. I don't know what yours is going to take, but that Ubuntu download is pretty big. And so now what we need to do is we want to install it. Now you're looking at the Oracle Box 7 interface here. I've got it turned into the dark background. You can have it in the light background. And there's some things to look at. You'll get used to it as you work with this. Like if you go to the Preferences button here, this is where you can change the location of your machines. For example, I like to put everything on my D drive, so I'm going to click this and go to Other and select my D drive. And then I've got one called VirtualBox VMs here. Right there, I'm going to select that folder. And then there's an authentication library that we don't care about. Here's my input, my update, language, display, and so forth, proxy, and interface. And this is where you change from a light to a dark interface. I have it on dark. I don't normally use a dark interface because I don't like it very well, especially for YouTube movies. But in this case, this is not so dark that it's impossible to read. And so I like it a great deal. I have been using it. So I click OK there. Now you've got an import and an export and a new and an add button, and that's all fine, well, and good. What we're going to do now is we're going to point it to our Ubuntu installation, and we're going to install Ubuntu. But you need to be aware there's a three-part process when you're working with VirtualBox. The first thing that you need to do is you're going to create a brand new virtual machine. It's called a VM. The term is VM for virtual machine. And you create a brand new VM. And what will happen is VirtualBox will set everything up and get it ready for you so that it's ready to run. You can actually try and start it right then, but it will not start because you have two more steps that you have to do. The next step you have to do is you have to adjust the settings for your VM, and there are some settings we're going to go through. Finally, you can start it and install the operating system. So let's do that. So I'm going to click this new gear button, and I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to say that this is Ubuntu 20.24.04. Now with Ubuntu, it changes pretty rapidly, so if you're evaluating others and you're keeping your old VMs around, you might want to put that version number on there just so that you know what version it is that you've installed here. It's not necessarily, but you should do that. Now it says no ISO images selected, and it says we're going to install the guest OS manually. Well, hold on. We're going to click this down arrow here and go to other. Excuse me, I'm going to click the other thing right here, and I'm going to go to software, Linux, where's it at? Ubuntu, and here's my new guy right here, 24.04. I'm going to grab this ISO right here. I'm going to skip unattended installation because what unattended installation is you create this file, and it answers all of the installation questions. And so you could submit that. This is a Microsoft thing. Microsoft invented this. And what it will do is the installation process will just answer those questions for you. If you don't have an unattend file, you have to select this skip unattend installation button so that you don't have to go through that. You're just going to do it manually. So we click next. Now in this case, what you're going to do is pick out how much memory you want to give to it. It's suggesting 2 gig, 2,148 megabytes of RAM. That's probably okay. If you have the room for it, maybe what you would want to do is maybe jack it up a little bit to maybe 4 gig. You don't need to go overboard with something like Linux. It's pretty light and carefree, pretty good. I am going to go ahead and assign more than one CPU to it. So I'm going to give it 2 CPUs and click next. The disk size is set for 25. If you were going to use this in production, 25 gig might be pretty small, but if you're just evaluating the OS, it's going to be fine. I'm going to go ahead and jack this up to 50 gig just to give myself some room. Click next, and then we get a summary screen and click finish. Okay, so now the machine is created. You've created the VM. You could try to start it. It's not going to start. We have to go through and do some settings. This is going to take us a minute, so hang in there with me. We want to go look at the settings next. So you click the settings button here. Now the settings button consists of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different sections. Each section, these are vertical. Each section that you go into will have one or more horizontal tabs. So you've got to get used to this. And you can see here that it says, oh, my type is Linux, my version is Ubuntu 64, and that's correct. What would happen if we were trying to download some weirdo OS that we didn't know about? We would have to go in and tell VirtualBox, hey, I've got this OS, and here's what it really is. You can go to Advanced. What I like to do in advanced mode is I like to turn on bidirectional mode here. Drag and drop bidirectional, shared clipboard bidirectional. Here's why I like to do that. Because if you want to drag something over onto your Ubuntu screen or from Ubuntu onto your Windows or your Mac desktop, you can do that. So drag and drop is enabled, and you can share directories on this machine as well. You could give it a description. I don't normally. And you could do disk encryption. I don't normally. I'm going to go down to System here. Now, System is really different. This needs some adjustment. I'm going to turn off at floppy. I'm going to click the hard disk and make it go to the top of the boot order. I'm going to click optical and make it go second in the boot order. I'm going to leave everything just exactly checked like it is right now. I'm not going to fiddle around with this. Again, you see that you've got two processors. If your CPU allows for hardware virtualization, you can enable these things here. If you enable something and it isn't available to you, you'll get a little wrench icon down here that tells you, hey, you can't do that. And then I'm going to enable acceleration. Under display, you're not really going to do anything with display, but this is actually pretty cool. You could adjust the amount of RAM that this machine is going to use on your GPU and some things like that. You could enable 3D acceleration if you were doing a game or something like that. Remote display allows you to send the display from your VirtualBox machine to a different computer. And I would want you to note here that it's using port 3389. This is the Microsoft Remote Desktop Protocol. And so it's using port 3389. So you could send your Ubuntu screen to a different monitor using port 3389. I don't do that, but it is possible. And you could also record the screen if you wanted to. Storage is really important, and what we need to remember is that when we're using VirtualBox, it is emulating hardware. So emulating means it's making it look like we're actually using real hardware when we're not. It's all virtualized. This is all done in software. So it's emulating a hardware controller for the hard drive. It's the old IDE. You'll never ever encounter IDE. It's way old, but they're emulating IDE here. And you can see that you've got your little CD-ROM sitting here. And it's a picture of a CD, so it's trying to show you virtually, hey, this is my installation software. I've got a CD here. You really don't. What you've really got is virtualized software, but that's okay. And then you have a SATA controller, just like you would have on a PC today. And it's emulating a virtual disk image. It's called a VDI. And so this is really cool. You just need to be able to read these things. You don't necessarily need to be able to add to them or take away. That would be for a more advanced feature later on. Now, under audio, if you knew that you wanted to play, for example, YouTube or something like that on your Ubuntu installation, you would have audio enabled, and that's fine. It doesn't hurt anything. Network is the really big important one. I want you to notice here that you have a possibility of 4 network adapters. They're called a network interface card or a network adapter. You can call it a NIC. You can call it an adapter. There's 4 of these things. 2, 3, and 4 are disabled. Number 1 is enabled, and it's set for what is called NAT. Now, what does that mean? NAT stands for Network Address Translation. And what it means is that it's going to go to your home computer, your Windows or your Mac computer, and it's going to say, please, sir, can I use your network card to get out to the web and do some work? And your computer's NIC is going to say, yes, stay right here, I'll go do the work for you, and I will come back. So it is acting on your behalf. That's what NAT is going to do for you. NAT's very common both in networking and in virtualization. You could choose, if you click this drop down, you could choose bridged adapter. And what that means is that we're going to share the adapter with our local PC here. If you can get away with NAT, you probably should. I think NAT's the better way to go. If for some reason you run into trouble with NAT, you could always set it to bridged and see if you can get it working for you there as well. The other things we're not going to work with in later movies, we'll work with what's called internal network. And what you can do is create an entire network on your own that these adapters here on these VMs can talk to a centralized resource. That's way beyond the context of what we're trying to do here. So I'm going to just stick with NAT here. Serial ports, that's an old thing. We really don't need them. So I generally just leave this alone. There's nothing to enable here. But you can see that you have 4 possible serial ports that you can enable. USB, this is where that pack that I told you to download, the extension pack, comes into play. Because by default, if you didn't have that installed, only USB 1.1 would work. But now Oracle Box version 7 with the extension pack allows you to go with USB 2, and you could enable USB 3. There's really no need to enable USB 3 unless you're going to use a USB drive with Ubuntu and you want it to be very speedy about the way that it downloads files or uploads files. USB 3.0 is much faster than 2, and 1.1 is way back in the Stone Age. So the fact that it's enabled for USB 2 is fine for what we need it to do. Then you've got shared folders. We don't need to share out the folders here. And you've got the user interface. And what this means is when it's running the VM, it's going to show you these icons at the bottom of the VM, and you can take and move those. You could refine them, move them around, things like that. I rarely ever do that, so I'm not going to worry about that. Click OK. Okay, now we've done 2 things. So we've set up, we've added the VM. Now we went into settings and adjusted the settings. And now we run our installation. So we're going to run the Ubuntu installation. Now what VirtualBox is going to do is it's going to start that ISO running. And we're going to go through the full VM installation here. So I'm going to say try or install Ubuntu. I'm going to hit enter. And now we are installing Ubuntu. We're installing Ubuntu inside a virtual machine that is a part of Oracle VirtualBox. I'm going to move this window up so you can see it a little better. Okay, this is just an aside, but I want to let you know that Ubuntu uses 2 letters to name their versions. And they have a word, and then they have an animal. Now, Ubuntu 24, the previous version, version 20, was focal fossa. So it was a fossa. It's a cat, some sort of rare cat, like a big animal. And it was focusing on something, so they called it focal fossa. Now, what they have here is it's called Noble Numbat. Now, I've never heard of a Numbat before. I had to look it up. But when you're installing Ubuntu version 24, it's called NN Noble Numbat, and that's the reason you get the crown look when you see the splash screen here. Okay, let's go back and get this going here. Now, of course, I'm going to pick English for my installation language here. Click Next. And this is really cool. Now, this is new to Ubuntu 24. What accessibility means is we're very focused on accessibility anymore with regard to the web development and things like that. And so we're saying, hey, is there a blind person? Is there someone who can't see very well? Maybe they're even colorblind. I'm red-green colorblind. I have a really hard time reading certain colors. Maybe they can't hear very well, that kind of a thing. So this is very accessible oriented, which I think is pretty cool. We click Next. I'm going to go with an English keyboard, English US. And you have several keyboards that you can select. Make sure you test the right one, but you can see it's going to load the English US keyboard. You can have it detected as well. I'm going to use a wired connection right here because I am wired to the internet. You could use Wi-Fi as well. There's your crown. That's the Noble Numbat. So what you do is you say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and update right now. So I click the update button. This is going to take a minute, so I'm going to put the movie on hold and come back once it's done updating. Okay, and I said to install. It said close the installer and come back here. And so here we are. And you can see that you've got an interface here. You've got the Noble Numbat icon right over here. But over here on the right, you have this install Ubuntu 24.04 LTS. Now, what's going on here? Well, Linux is pretty weird. So you can download certain distributions of Linux and you can try them out. You don't really need to officially install them on the computer. In fact, it's actually pretty handy because you could put it on a USB and you could boot to Linux from your USB and run it on your computer without ever actually getting into the actual computer itself. So you can evaluate Linux. Now, that's not the formal installation. What we want to do is go through the formal installation because right now we're evaluating it. So I'm going to double click this icon here. And I'm going to go through with the full installation of Ubuntu. There's the Ubuntu sound. I'm going to select the English keyboard. Accessibility, again, all the same thing. English US keyboard. I'm wired. This time we should not get the update like we got before. How would you like to install Ubuntu? Well, I want to do a interactive or automatic. So what's happening here is this seems like, this is new to me, but this seems like it's very similar to Windows. If you've installed Windows 11, it's like, okay, click the button and talk to the hand, because I'm just going to go do everything else by myself, which is great. I think that's fine for newer users. I'm going to go through the interactive installation just so you can see what it looks like. So we're going to go with the essentials. Now, if you were using this for real, like you had a laptop and you installed Ubuntu for real, like you're going to use it, I would go with this guy here, with the big guy, and it has a bunch of features that come with it, which are really cool. But in this case, all we're trying to do is run Ubuntu in a VM. So I'm going to go with the defaults, just the basic stuff. I can say install recommended proprietary software. Do I have something that I'm going to use in Ubuntu that needs some software that came with the thing that I bought? I don't. So I'm just going to go ahead and use this for right now. This might be something that I might do. Download and install support for additional media such as MP3s, MP4s, and movie, like Windows Movie format. Okay, so it's going to go ahead and grab all this stuff. Now this might scare you. It says erase disk and install Ubuntu. Am I going to erase my entire Windows hard drive and install Ubuntu, or my Mac and install Ubuntu? No. What it's saying is we're going to erase that 50 gig that we allocated for my VM, and I'm going to install Ubuntu there. So that's fine by me. I'm going to click next. Now it wants to know a name. So I'm going to type in my name, William Heldman. And it's going to suggest a computer name, and it's going to suggest my username. I'm going to live with that, but if you wanted a different name and a different username, you could have that. My username, I think, is just going to be Bill. And my password, I would never do this if I were in a production environment, but I always stick with a password that's easy to remember. I learned from teaching students that you want to have them go with a password that is familiar, that you all use. So we all know what Welcome One is, but again, I would not do this if this was going to be in a production environment somewhere. I would want to make sure that I had a really solid password. I love this feature. If you were on a Microsoft Windows network, you could use Active Directory, but I'm not going to use Active Directory right now. So it's saying that it's a weak password. Let me try putting a exclamation point on here. Welcome one. Oh, I didn't realize you could type in there. I'm going to put welcome one exclamation point, and then I'll put welcome one exclamation point on here. And let's see if it likes that. It likes that password. Let's see. Oh, the username is invalid, and I'll tell you why, because I put a cap B here. Linux doesn't generally like capital letters, so whenever you can, you should try just keying in lowercase letters. That's going to make it feel better. There, the next button lights up. Okay. Now, this is really cool. It knows that I'm in Denver. I don't really live in Denver. I live in Lakewood, but it knows that I'm in Denver in America. All you have to do is point to a place on the map where you're at, and it will position itself there in case that it didn't already do that. Notice also that it thinks it's July 20th and it's 5:37. That is absolutely not correct. That's not the correct time zone that I'm in. It is not that time right now. We'll fix that later. So I'm going to click Next. Okay, and then we get a summary screen here. I'm going to tell it to install. This is going to take a minute. I'm going to put the movie on hold and come back when the software is done installing. I'm going to say that this is like I don't know, 15, 20 minutes of install time. So just be patient. It's going to show you a bunch of different movies on things that you can do with Ubuntu. So it's pretty cool. I really like this new installation screen. They've done a great job here. By the way, these terms here, SDA1 and SDA2, ext4, are Linux terms. And at some point, as you learn more about Linux, you need to know what those terms mean. Here we go. So I'm going to go ahead and hit install, and then I'm going to pause the movie, come back to you when it's done installing. Okay, so we're all done installing. That, like I said, was about 15 minutes. And there's the Noble Numbat logo. It's kind of cool. So you're going to click Restart Now. Now you might get into trouble because if you restart, it might tell you to pull the CD out of the carriage. Well, you don't have a CD. You have a virtualized CD, but if we do run into this, I'll show you how you get around it. So I'm going to click Restart Now. There you go. It says, please remove the installation medium and press Enter. I want to take a minute just real quick to talk to you about this little right control down here. On the bottom right-hand side of the screen, you see that you have a right control button. What it's telling you here is that if you hit the right control key, it will get you out of the VM. What do we mean by that? Well, when you click inside the VM, you may not be able to get your cursor back out of it. So you will hit the right control key and it will let you back out of the VM that you're currently in. In this case, Ubuntu allows you to get out of it just fine. I'm going to click File, Close from up here on the top of the menu. This is going to actually close the VirtualBox session. And I'm going to select Power Off the Machine and click OK. And then what I have to do is I have to go into Settings. I go down to Storage, and I've got this guy right here. It says that the CD is now empty, which is great. That's exactly what we want. It can stay there just like it is. Click OK, and then restart the machine. So if you do get that where it says, hey, take the installation medium out and then hit restart, you can check and make sure that it did indeed remove that virtual CD icon, and then restart the machine, and it'll restart just fine. So I'm going to wait until this boots up, and we'll just do a quick tour through Ubuntu Linux, and then we'll be done with the movie. When it comes up and it's getting ready to boot, it's going to show Ubuntu at the top as the selection with the star next to it. It'll time out on that if you want to just wait, or if you don't want to wait, you can hit Enter, and it'll go ahead and boot Ubuntu. This is the default logo for Ubuntu, the circle with the 3 dots in it. Ubuntu is manufactured by a company called Canonical. They're based in Europe. This is a European company. Okay, here we go. This is what it looks like. So you've got a little bar here, so you type in that. Type in your password. And if everything goes right, we remember our password, all that kind of stuff. Here we are at Ubuntu. Now you can see that the install Ubuntu thing has gone away. We've got a welcome screen here. Let me run you through this real quick. We'll click Next. And it says, should we enable Ubuntu Pro? I don't need to do that right now, but you could investigate it. So it allows you to, you can get it free for up to 5 machines and some security updates. I'm not interested in it right now, so I'll click Next. And then it wants to know, do you want to share with Canonical your experience with Ubuntu? It's fine by me. If you don't want to, you can. You don't have to. And then there's a whole ton of applications that are installed on here. Here's Steam, of course, and Firefox, IntelliJ, Microsoft Visual Studio, and some others. It's just showing you that you have all kinds of apps that you can install in Ubuntu. And it's called the Ubuntu App Center. It's very cool. Finish. Now, the only thing I want to leave you with here, there's a couple of things you should know about. First of all, we're going to use the terminal a lot. So when I begin to do movies on Linux, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and get into what is called the terminal. Another term for it is the command line interface. So the way to get that is to click this little ring here, Show Apps. There's the terminal right there on the bottom. I'm going to right click and I'm going to pin this to my dash. So this is now called the dash. It didn't used to be called that, but now it's called the dash. I'm going to hit escape a couple of times to get away from there. And now I've got my terminal. And when I do more Linux movies, I begin to start to show you how to use Linux, we're going to wind up relying on the terminal quite a bit. Now on the left-hand side of the screen here, this is called the GNOME interface, G-N-O-M-E. And the reason it has that G in front of it, they're all about G. They're all about GNU and GNOME. The reason for that is that the licensing infrastructure for Linux is called the GNU license. And again, it's named after an animal. I don't know where this comes from. It doesn't matter. And so here we're using the GNOME interface. And I would like for you to know that it is possible for certain Linux distributions to change this desktop. They call it the desktop experience. It is possible for you to change that desktop and go to a different one, but the default desktop is GNOME. Now we've got to handle this right here, so we need to look at this. So I'm going to go to settings because it is currently, oh, it did update for me. I guess it is right at 2 o'clock, so it did update. I'm in good shape then, so I don't want to worry about that. It is showing up in military time. So let's see if I can find the settings. This is the store. This is Firefox. That's the default browser that comes with Ubuntu. This is for your files. It's like the File Explorer in Windows or on the Mac. This is the App Center. This is the store where you can get other software. If you need help, that's here. Here's the terminal. Here's the trash. And I don't know where the settings are at. Let's see if we can find the settings. So I'm going to come in here and look for settings. There they are. I might right-click this and pin it to the dash. Escape, 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 and then run settings. It's pretty straightforward. I'm going to go clear to the bottom here and look for, where's it going to be at? I thought it was under time. It's clear down here at the bottom. It's under System, and I'm going to go into Time here. You can see that it did automatically set me to Denver time zone, which is super cool. It's got the 24-hour time format. I'm not in the military, so I don't care about 24-hour time. Some of you probably use it, which is fine. I'm going to set this to AM, PM, like that. It automatically does it. Now, the one weird thing about Linux you're going to have to get used to, like on the Mac, your close button and everything's on the left. Linux is on the right like it is in Windows, but in some Linux OSs, they're going to move the location of this. So you might have to look over here on the left to see the location. But in this case, it's very similar to Windows. Minimize, maximize, and close. I'm going to close this window. Okay, last thing. How do you get out of your VM once you've got it running? Here's what you do. You click File, Close. Now, if you said save the machine state, what that would do is if you had any applications that were open, it would save those for you, and the next time you opened up the VM, they would be all ready to go. In this case, I don't want to do that. I'm going to go ahead and say power off the machine. You could send a shutdown signal. There is a way to do that from the command line, the terminal as well, but we're okay here. We're just going to go ahead and power off the machine, and that will close that VM. Congratulations. You have learned how to use Oracle VirtualBox. We created an Ubuntu 24.04 installation. We created the VM first, we adjusted its settings, and then we went ahead and started the installation and went through a full installation of an ISO file. Last thing, some machines that you download, we'll see this later when I start going into Kali Linux, some VMs that you download are already pre-prepared and you don't have to go through the ISO. They're all done and you just import it right into VirtualBox. It makes it a lot easier. But in this case, with Ubuntu, we had an ISO file. We had to go through the full-on installation. Hope you had a good time with this movie. I hope it's helpful. Please like and subscribe to my movies. If you enjoy this, tell your friends about it. My whole goal is to just make sure you guys have the information you need to install this software, work with technology, and just have a lot of fun learning about it. So have a good day. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.